A person's true character is never revealed when they are standing in the sunlight of prosperity. It is exposed when they believe the storm has arrived, and they have to decide who they are willing to throw overboard to survive. Where are you watching from? This is a fictional story, but the brutal lessons about greed and loyalty it contains are as real as the dirt beneath my boots. My name is Elias. I am 70 years old, and over the past 5 decades, I have built a construction and real estate empire that spans the entire western seaboard. My holding companies control thousands of acres of prime commercial land, and my net worth is a number that most people would find difficult to comprehend. Yet, despite the vast wealth at my disposal, I have always chosen to live a life of deliberate simplicity. I reside on a 200-acre working farm 50 miles outside the city limits. I don't wear bespoke Italian suits or drive imported luxury sports cars. I prefer the honest weight of a hammer in my hand. I spend my weekends working as a handyman on my own property, fixing broken fences, repairing the old barn's roof, and tending to the soil. The smell of fresh pine, motor oil, and damp earth keeps my mind sharp and my soul grounded. It reminds me of the hungry, desperate young man I used to be, ensuring I never take my success for granted. My son David is a good man, but he possesses a fatal flaw. He has a deeply trusting heart that often blinds him to the darker realities of human nature. He had always been sheltered from the ruthless predators that circle the wealthy. His naivete was fully exposed the day he brought Victoria home to meet me. Victoria was a woman who moved through the world as if she owned it, though she had never actually worked a day in her life to earn it. She stepped out of David's car wearing towering designer heels and a silk dress that cost more than my first truck. The moment she set foot inside my rustic, comfortable farmhouse, her perfect painted face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. She looked at the worn hardwood floors, the antique furniture, and the mud-stained work boots I had left by the front door, as if she had just stepped into an open sewer. I was standing in the kitchen, wearing a faded flannel shirt and canvas overalls, having just finished repairing the plumbing under the sink. Victoria looked me up and down, her eyes filled with naked contempt. She didn't see the owner of a billion-dollar empire. She saw an uneducated, lower-class laborer. "David, darling," Victoria whispered, her voice laced with a condescending sneer, though she made sure it was loud enough for me to hear. "I simply cannot believe people still live in run-down, primitive conditions like this in the 21st century. It smells like a livestock barn. Are you absolutely sure this is the right place?" David flushed with embarrassment, frantically trying to smooth things over. "Victoria, please. My father has worked incredibly hard for everything we have here. This farm means the world to him." Throughout dinner, her behavior only worsened. She pushed the perfectly cooked steak around her plate as if it were toxic waste. She complained that the wine was too bitter, the air was too dusty, and the chairs were too hard. She casually mentioned that once she and David were married, her first order of business would be to sell this trashy, decaying piece of land so they could purchase a multi-million-dollar penthouse in the city center, where real people lived. I remained perfectly silent, eating my meal and watching her with the cold, calculating eyes of a man who had spent 50 years dismantling corporate sharks. I looked deep into Victoria's eyes, searching for even a microscopic trace of genuine affection for my son. I found nothing. All I saw was a hungry, calculating void. She was mentally appraising the antique grandfather clock in the corner, estimating its liquidation value. She thought I was a foolish, impoverished old man, entirely ignorant of her superior intellect. She was wearing a carefully crafted mask of sophistication to hide the soul of a merciless parasite. That night, the heavy silence of the farm was broken only by the sound of the wind rattling the old window panes. I stood in my study, staring out at the ink-black fields, when David walked in. His face was drawn, and he looked defensive, already preparing to justify the disastrous dinner. "Dad, I know she came off a little strong," David began, his voice tight. "She grew up in a very different environment. She's just used to a certain standard of living. She has a strong personality, but she loves me." I turned around, leaning against the heavy oak desk, and looked my son directly in the eyes. "There is a massive difference between having a strong personality and possessing a cruel, greedy heart, David. I have spent my entire life negotiating with people who want to take what isn't theirs. I know the look of a predator. That woman does not love you. She loves the financial potential she believes you represent." David bristled, his loyalty to her blinding his common sense. "You're being unfair." You're judging her based on one dinner. I'm going to marry her, Dad, whether you approve of her or not. My heart ached for him. The glittering illusion of her beauty and false charm had completely ensnared him. I knew that arguing would only push him further into her trap. If I wanted to save my son from a lifetime of misery and financial ruin, words would not be enough. He needed irrefutable proof. He needed to see the monster hiding beneath the makeup. "All right, David," I said, my voice low and completely serious. "If you are so certain of her love, then you won't mind putting it to a test." "A very simple, very revealing test." David frowned, crossing his arms defensively. "What kind of test?" "We are going to play a game," I explained, stepping closer. "We are going to show her a family standing on the absolute edge of a terrifying financial cliff. We will tell her that my company has collapsed, that the bank is calling in millions of dollars in debt, and that this farm, the vehicles, and everything we own is about to be repossessed. If her love is genuine, she will stand by your side and help you weather the storm. If I am right, she will run the moment she smells the smoke. Are you brave enough to find out who you are actually planning to marry?" David stood frozen in the dim light of the study. I could see the painful conflict raging behind his eyes. He loved her, but a small rational part of his brain, the part I had raised to seek the truth, knew that I might be right. He wanted to prove me wrong so desperately that he finally gave a slow, reluctant nod. "I'll do it," David whispered, "but when she stays, you have to promise to welcome her into this family with open arms." "You have my word," I replied. The next morning we set the stage for the greatest performance of our lives. I called my private legal team and had them draft highly realistic, terrifyingly official-looking bank notices and foreclosure documents. I traded my clean clothes for an old frayed shirt and sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the scattered papers, projecting the image of a man whose entire world had just been shattered. Victoria descended the stairs an hour later, wearing a silk robe, filing her nails and chattering endlessly about booking a destination wedding in the south of France. She was entirely oblivious to the heavy, suffocating atmosphere in the room. I pushed the stack of red-stamped foreclosure notices across the table. "Victoria," I said, my voice intentionally ragged and trembling, "there is something you need to know. A major commercial project in the north failed catastrophically. We leveraged everything we had to keep it afloat, but the market turned. The bank has frozen our accounts. They are calling in the loans. We have 30 days before they seize the farm, the company, and every single asset we possess. We are entirely bankrupt." David stepped forward, playing his part flawlessly. He reached out and gently took her hand, his eyes shining with fake unshed tears. "Victoria, I am so sorry I didn't tell you the risks sooner. But it doesn't matter. We have each other, we can rebuild. I'll take on extra shifts. I'll work construction if I have to. I won't let you starve." The room fell into a deathly, suffocating silence. I watched Victoria's face with the precision of a hawk. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The perfectly crafted mask of the sweet, loving fiancé dissolved in less than 3 seconds. The feigned sympathy vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror and disgust. She violently yanked her hand out of David's grasp, taking 3 rapid steps backward as if my son had suddenly contracted a highly contagious disease. She looked around the rustic wooden kitchen, the space she had merely tolerated when she thought it was a temporary stepping stone to a penthouse. Now, it looked like a permanent prison. "What do you mean, bankrupt?" Victoria shrieked, her voice losing its polished aristocratic tone and becoming shrill and grating. "What the hell are you people talking about? Everything?" David stepped toward her, his hands raised pleadingly. "We can get through this, Victoria. Our love is stronger than any financial setback." Victoria let out a cruel, barking laugh that echoed harshly off the wooden walls. "Love, are you completely out of your mind? Do you think love is going to pay off millions of dollars in bank debt? Do you think love is going to buy me the penthouse I deserve? Were you planning to force me to live in this disgusting mud-filled barn and carry the debt of a failed, pathetic farmer?" David stood completely frozen, his heart shattering into 1,000 pieces as the horrifying reality of the woman he loved washed over him. "Victoria, you said you loved me for who I am. I loved the future you promised me." She screamed, her face contorting with rage. "I didn't waste the best years of my youth to marry a broke, blue-collar loser. I should have trusted my instincts the second I saw this filthy house and your pathetic father." She stormed around the living room, frantically gathering her expensive designer coats and handbags. She ripped the diamond engagement ring off her finger and hurled it directly at David's chest. It hit him and bounced onto the dusty floorboard, a cheap discard in her eyes. "You are a fraud, David," Victoria spat venomously as she marched toward the front door. "You and your fraud of a father. Enjoy your miserable bankrupt life in this sewer. I am done with you." She slammed the heavy wooden door behind her with such vicious force that a framed family photograph fell from the wall, the glass shattering across the floor. The sound of her luxury car engine roared to life, spinning its tires in the gravel driveway as she fled from our supposed poverty as fast as she possibly could. David collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. He didn't cry, but his entire body shook with the silent, devastating impact of absolute betrayal. I walked over and placed a heavy, comforting hand on his shoulder. It was a brutal, agonizing lesson, but it was a necessary pain. A pain that would save him from a lifetime of being bled dry. Victoria didn't waste a single second mourning the end of her relationship. Less than 2 weeks later, the social media updates began. She was proudly flaunting her new life, posting endless photos from 5-star luxury resorts, private yachts, and Michelin-starred restaurants. She was dripping in new diamonds, and in every photo she was draped over the arm of a slick, impeccably dressed young man named Julian. Julian was widely known in the city's elite social circles as a brilliant, up-and-coming venture capitalist. He drove imported supercars, wore $50,000 watches, and threw lavish parties that cost more than most people's mortgages. Victoria had found a new, infinitely wealthier host to attach herself to, and she wanted the entire world, especially David, to know it. She posted cruel, thinly veiled captions mocking bankrupt farmers and celebrating her escape from the lower classes. David watched her flaunt her new supposed paradise, his face a mask of cold stoicism. But I simply sat in my study, looking at the photos on the screen, and smiled a slow, dangerous smile. Victoria believed she had executed a brilliant maneuver, trading a sinking ship for a luxury cruise liner. She believed she had outsmarted us all, but she had just made a catastrophic, fatal mistake. Because I knew Julian, I knew exactly who he was, and more importantly, I knew exactly what he was hiding behind his glittering, expensive facade. Julian was not a brilliant venture capitalist. He was a professional con artist running a highly sophisticated, incredibly fragile pyramid scheme. He used money from new investors to pay off the old ones, maintaining an illusion of massive wealth through heavily leveraged assets and high-interest shadow loans. And the most beautiful, poetic irony of all was this. The anonymous offshore private equity firm that Julian had recently borrowed $10 million from to keep his fraudulent empire afloat was entirely owned and controlled by me. Every sip of vintage champagne Victoria drank, every night she spent in a luxury hotel suite, and the massive diamond ring Julian had just given her, it was all being paid for by my money. Julian was a puppet, and I was holding the strings. I decided it was time to do some personal reconnaissance. I needed to know exactly how deep Julian's desperation ran. I used my elite connections to secure access to the exclusive, members-only cigar club where Julian frequently conducted his shady business deals. I dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, a rare departure from my handyman attire, and quietly slipped into the club's VIP section. The club was a labyrinth of dark mahogany and thick smoke. I noticed Julian sitting in a secluded booth with a notorious underground loan broker. I quietly moved into the adjacent booth, which was separated by a thin, decorative wooden partition. I pressed my back against the wood, blending into the shadows. I had essentially found a secret room within the club, a perfect vantage point. From my hidden position, I overheard the entire damning conversation. "The offshore firm is demanding their quarterly payment, Julian," the broker hissed, his voice tight with anxiety. $10 million, plus interest. They sent a final warning today. If you don't wire the funds by the end of the month, they are going to trigger the default clauses and seize everything. The cars, the penthouse, the company assets. You'll be wiped out. Calm down, Julian replied, though his voice trembled with suppressed panic. I have a plan. I'm marrying Victoria next week in the most publicized wedding of the year. It will cement my image as a billionaire. Once the new investors see the wedding coverage, they'll dump millions into the new tech fund. I'll use that fresh capital to pay off the offshore loan. It's foolproof. And the girl? The broker asked, "Does she know you're broke?" Julian laughed, a cold, ruthless sound. Victoria? He assumed he had time. He assumed the offshore firm would wait. He had no idea that the chairman of that firm was currently listening to his every word. I left the club, my mind calculating the exact trajectory of their destruction. I returned to the farm and summoned David to my study. I handed him the thick dossier containing Julian's true financial status, the details of the pyramid scheme, and the copies of the loan documents Victoria had foolishly signed. David read through the papers, his eyes widening in shock. He's completely bankrupt. He's worse than bankrupt. He's a criminal. And Victoria, she signed a guarantee for millions. She let her greed blind her to the truth, I said quietly. She chose the illusion of wealth over genuine loyalty. Now the bill has come due. What are we going to do? David asked, his voice hardening, the last remnants of his naive love burning away to reveal a man ready for justice. We are going to attend a wedding, I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. Julian's default deadline is midnight on the day of their ceremony. I have ordered my legal team to execute the asset seizure protocols exactly at the moment they exchange their vows. But Julian has ties to dangerous people. When cornered, he might become violent. We need to be prepared for anything. I handed David a small encrypted radio earpiece. If Julian's underground associates try to intervene, or if things get physical, we use a secret distress code. If you hear me say, the foundation is crumbling, you step back immediately. My private security team will breach the doors and handle the threat. We are not just exposing a fraud, we are dismantling a criminal. The day of the wedding arrived, heralded by a flurry of media attention and high society gossip. Victoria had spared absolutely no expense, utilizing Julian's rapidly dwindling, borrowed credit to rent the grand ballroom of the most exclusive, historic hotel in the financial district. It was designed to be the social event of the decade, a glittering, opulent display of wealth intended to secure Julian's next round of fraudulent investments and cement Victoria's status as a queen of the elite. David and I sat in the plush leather seats of my armored SUV, parked discreetly across the street from the hotel's grand entrance. I wore a bespoke charcoal gray suit that radiated quiet, terrifying authority. David sat beside me dressed equally sharp, his posture rigid with anticipation. We watched as a parade of luxury vehicles pulled up to the valet, discharging the city's most influential politicians, wealthy socialites, and elite business moguls. They were all walking blindly into a slaughterhouse. She invited everyone, David muttered, his eyes tracking the guests. Half the people I do business with are in that room. She really wanted to make a spectacle of this. A spectacle is exactly what she is going to get, I replied, checking my watch. It was exactly 6 o'clock. The ceremony was beginning. Let's go. We exited the vehicle and walked toward the hotel entrance, flanked by two of my top security operatives dressed in inconspicuous dark suits. The hotel security tried to stop us at the velvet ropes, asking for our invitations. I simply reached into my breast pocket and handed the head of security a black titanium card, bearing the insignia of my holding company, along with a federal court authorization document. The guard's eyes widened in sheer panic. He instantly unhooked the rope and bowed his head, stepping aside without a single word. We walked down the long carpeted corridor toward the grand ballroom. The sound of a live symphony orchestra playing a majestic wedding march drifted through the heavy mahogany doors. We pushed them open and stepped into the back of the cavernous hall. The room was breathtakingly beautiful, draped in thousands of white roses, crystal chandeliers casting a warm, golden glow over the hundreds of seated guests. At the end of the long white silk aisle stood Julian, sweating profusely in his custom tuxedo, his eyes darting nervously around the room, knowing the financial guillotine was hovering inches above his neck. And then there was Victoria. She was walking slowly down the aisle, wearing a diamond-encrusted wedding gown that belonged on the cover of a magazine. Her face was radiant with absolute triumph. She believed she had won. She believed she had successfully conquered the world. She reached the altar, took Julian's trembling hands, and turned slightly to face the crowd, basking in their admiration. That was when her eyes locked onto us standing at the back of the hall. The radiant, triumphant smile instantly vanished from Victoria's face, replaced by a contortion of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. She let go of Julian's hands and took a step forward, completely disregarding the priest who was about to speak. "What are you doing here?" Victoria shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly over the soft orchestral music, shocking the elite guests into silence. How did you bankrupt beggars get past security? This is a private multi-million-dollar event. I demand that you leave immediately. I will not have the stench of your filthy farm ruining my perfect day. The entire ballroom fell completely silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to look at David and me. David didn't flinch. He didn't look hurt. He simply looked at the woman he had once loved, with an expression of profound, chilling pity. I stepped forward, walking slowly and deliberately down the center of the white silk aisle. My footsteps echoed loudly in the cavernous silence. I didn't look at Victoria. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Julian as I approached the altar. The remaining color drained from Julian's face. He looked like a man who had just seen the Grim Reaper. He recognized my face from the financial profiles of the holding company he owed his life to. I apologize for interrupting the ceremony, I said, my voice calm, deep, and amplified by the sheer acoustics of the room. But I am not here to attend a wedding. I am here to collect a debt. Victoria let out a harsh, mocking laugh, placing her hands on her hips in a display of supreme arrogance. A debt? You are a bankrupt, pathetic old handyman. You couldn't afford to buy the flowers in this room. Guards, remove this lunatic immediately. Nobody moved. The hotel security stood perfectly still at the edges of the room, acutely aware of the court orders in my possession. I stopped 10 feet from the altar and slowly pulled a thick red-stamped legal folder from my jacket. You are mistaken, Victoria. This is not a notice of my bankruptcy. This is an emergency. Federal asset seizure order for Julian's entire estate. I turned to face the hundreds of confused, wealthy guests. My name is Elias. I am the chairman and sole owner of Vanguard Financial Holdings, the institution that currently owns 95% of Julian's outstanding, fraudulent debt. Everything you see in this room, the flowers, the champagne, the luxury cars parked outside, and even the diamonds on the bride's dress was purchased with stolen, borrowed money that Julian has no ability to repay. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of shocked gasps and furious whispers. Investors who had given Julian their money suddenly realized they were standing in the middle of a massive crime scene. The entire ballroom was left utterly speechless by the revelation. Victoria's face went completely slack. She looked at Julian, panic finally piercing her delusion. Julian, tell them he's lying. Tell them he's just a crazy old man. Julian couldn't speak. He was trembling so violently that his knees finally gave out. He collapsed onto the white silk altar, burying his face in his hands, weeping uncontrollably in front of the city's elite. His massive, multi-million-dollar fraud was entirely discovered, exposed in the most humiliating, public arena imaginable. Victoria stared at the pathetic, broken man crying on the floor. Her mind violently struggled to process the destruction of her reality. She turned back to me, her chest heaving. No, you're bankrupt. David told me. I saw the papers. The papers were a test, Victoria, I said coldly, my voice cutting through the rising chaos of the room like a blade. My company is worth billions. The farm is entirely unencumbered. We wanted to see who you truly were when you thought the money was gone. And you showed us exactly what kind of parasite you are. You failed the test. The realization struck her with the force of a freight train. She had willingly thrown away genuine love and unimaginable, secure wealth for a fake, debt-ridden illusion. She had traded a solid foundation for a castle made of sand, and the tide had just rushed in. And it gets worse for you, I continued, opening the folder. Julian isn't just bankrupt. Before this wedding, he had you sign a stack of documents you believed were standard prenuptial agreements. In reality, you signed as the personal guarantor for a $3 million bridge loan. Julian has defaulted. You are now legally responsible for millions of dollars in debt. Victoria screamed a high, piercing sound of absolute, mind-shattering despair. She fell to her knees beside Julian, grabbing the lapels of his tuxedo and shaking him violently, shrieking obscenities, demanding to know if it was true. Julian only sobbed louder, cementing her doom. Suddenly, the desperation in Julian's mind snapped into violence. He realized his life was over, and the man responsible was standing right in front of him. With a feral, unhinged roar, Julian scrambled to his feet, pulled a concealed, heavy brass paperweight from his pocket, and lunged directly at David, aiming for his head. The foundation is crumbling, I shouted, triggering the secret distress code. Before Julian could even swing his weapon, David stepped smoothly to the side, pivoting with the grace of a trained fighter. He didn't wait for the security team. David drove his fist forward in a brutal, lightning-fast arc, and punched Julian squarely in the jaw. The sickening crack of bone shattered the remaining silence. Julian was lifted off his feet and slammed backward onto the marble altar, out cold before he even hit the ground. My security team flooded the room seconds later, accompanied by federal agents who immediately secured the unconscious fraudster, reading him his rights as they locked heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. The glamorous wedding had descended into absolute chaos. The wealthy guests, desperate to avoid being associated with a massive federal fraud scandal, stampeded toward the exits. Within 10 minutes, the grand ballroom was empty, save for the federal agents, my family, and Victoria. The hotel staff, acting on the orders of the bankruptcy receivers, began ruthlessly stripping the room of its extravagant decorations. The debt collectors Julian had tried to evade had arrived in the lobby. They marched down the aisle, their faces grim and unsympathetic, and surrounded Victoria. "Take it off," the lead collector demanded, pointing at her diamond necklace. Victoria was hyperventilating, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. She frantically unclasped the necklace, handed over the diamond earrings, and finally, with shaking fingers, pulled the massive engagement ring off her hand. She was left kneeling on the torn white silk of the aisle, her expensive wedding dress stained and ruined, completely stripped of the wealth she had worshipped above all else. She looked up, her desperate eyes locking onto David. She crawled toward him, grabbing the hem of his trousers, weeping hysterically. "David, please, please, I'm so sorry. I was confused. Julian tricked me. He manipulated me. I still love you. Please, take me back to the farm. I'll do anything. I'll work. I'll be the perfect wife." David looked down at her, his expression completely unreadable. He had once loved this woman with all his heart, but the person he loved had never truly existed. "You didn't want the farm when you thought it was all I had, Victoria," David said, his voice quiet, but filled with absolute finality. "You only want it now because you know how much it's worth. You aren't sorry for leaving me. You're just sorry you picked the wrong bank account." He gently but firmly pulled his leg away from her desperate grasp. "You are completely replaced in my life by peace and self-respect. I wish you luck with your new debt." He turned his back on her and walked toward the exit. I followed closely behind him. We didn't look back as Victoria's agonizing screams of despair echoed through the empty, hollow ballroom, mourning the empire she had thrown away with her own two hands. The aftermath was exactly as I had calculated. Julian was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for running a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Victoria was left completely destitute. The banks seized her luxury cars, her designer wardrobe, and her apartment. Burdened with the massive debt she had foolishly co-signed, she was forced to declare complete bankruptcy. She now works a grueling minimum-wage job, living in a tiny, drafty apartment, haunted every single day by the memory of the immense wealth and genuine love she discarded because she couldn't tolerate the sight of a man in work boots. David and I returned to the farm. The air there is clean, the soil is rich, and the work is hard. But it is honest. David took over the primary management of the construction firm, leading with a newfound wisdom and a sharp, discerning eye that can spot a parasite from a mile away. He learned the most painful, expensive lesson a man can learn. Never allow the glittering illusion of beauty and false status to blind you to the dark reality of a greedy heart. True wealth is not measured by the car you drive or the designer label on your clothes. True wealth is found in the dirt on your hands, the sweat on your brow, and the unbreakable loyalty of the people who stand by you when they believe you have nothing left to give them. Protect your legacy, guard your heart, and never be afraid to test the loyalty of those who claim to love you.